we've started to understand more and more that the inflammation that is at the root of so much chronic disease in our practices is actually wreaking its havoc on the body via oxidative stress and damage. And so hence the rise in popularity and focus on antioxidant interventions, supplements, foods, lifestyle choices. But are we missing the forest for the trees? Is it a very real possibility that an overfocus or an inappropriate or unnuanced focus on antioxidants may actually be making disease worse? Absolutely. Welcome to Functional Medicine for Real World Impact, where we're diving into the complex, interconnected nature of health and disease, exploring not just theory, but practically what it takes to turn functional medicine insight into powerful, practical, real-world results. So please hit subscribe and let's get started. This is Tracy Harrison from the School of Applied Functional Medicine, and today I want to talk about the antioxidant trap and give guidance and some clinical tips that all progressive medical and wellness professionals can use in their practice right away. Today in particular, I want to present and bust 5 common myths about antioxidants in assessment of chronic disease cases and in your interventional plans. So please be sure to stay with me for all of them, because there are pearls here that you really want to apply in your clinical practice to make sure that your well-intended solutions aren't actually worsening disease. The first myth is the notion that oxidative stress is always bad and that the less of it we have, the better. And in truth, we need oxidative stress and even low-grade oxidative damage in order to both survive and to thrive. The reality is that free radicals are a part of normal life. Even the basic cellular respiration process that's ongoing incessantly in our mitochondria to generate ATP or energy for our cells to fuel generates a tremendous amount of oxidative stress. Thyroid hormone synthesis, for example, is notorious for generating a lot of oxidative stress. It's one of the reasons why we need such strong oxidative antioxidant function locally in the thyroid gland. Our immune response to any opportunistic overgrowth or infectious threat generates a lot of oxidative stress. Toxicity, toxins that we're exposed to on a day in, day out normal basis in our modern lifestyles generates oxidative stress and damage in the body. Plus, there are a lot of things that we might do just being normal people in today's society, whether it's over exercising, especially excessive aerobic exercise. We're exposed to a lot of stress and experience surges or elevated levels in cortisol or norepinephrine or epinephrine. We consume foods that have a lot of compounds in them that can generate oxidative stress, whether it's charred meats and poultry, especially here in the summertime in the U.S., cooking on the grill, generating a lot of heterocyclic amines and other advanced glycation end products that can wreak havoc on our tissues. Another so common example is the popular French fry food, which is perhaps one of the most pro-oxidant foods we have in our typical daily dietary practices. We're exposed to a lot of oxidative stress. But the good news is that the body is designed to have strong endogenous antioxidant systems. And too often when we're thinking about the need to counter pro-oxidant load with antioxidant response, we go immediately to thinking about something external that we need to bring into the body. Oh, we need to eat this food or we need to take this supplement. But the strongest, most potent component of our antioxidant defenses are not about what we consume. It's about appropriately stimulating and fueling and nourishing the endogenous antioxidant pathways that we thankfully are born with. That is an innate part of human physiology. But we need to be exposed to oxidative stress in a dynamic we call hormesis, because these endogenous antioxidant pathways have to be stimulated, right? It's one of the best examples of use it or lose it in the human body. If we are not behaving in a way that stimulates the need for antioxidant response, then we are way less likely to actually achieve the antioxidant capacity and consistent production that we need in order to truly thrive. This is why we need a certain amount of challenge. And this is very much about ensuring that we are suggesting a level of hormetic challenge or oxidative stress that is appropriate for the individual. I like to often talk about exercise being one of the best examples of hormesis in action. We are purposefully challenging our muscles. We're challenging our aerobic capacity, which is certainly doing some low-grade damage to various systems in the body. But it stimulates growth and greater health in our muscles. It stimulates greater oxygenation capacity in the body. It stimulates greater resilience. We want to be challenging ourselves within our capacity. And so this starts to bust another myth that there is the ideal diet, there's the ideal exercise regimen, and we just need to read the right book or listen to the right podcast or find the right purveyor of this truth that works for everyone. And of course, this begins to get into the essential topic of bioindividuality. What is hormetic or health promoting for one person may actually be harmful for another. And so while we need oxidative stress, it needs to be appropriate for the individual. And this is why over exercising can actually create harm. In particular, you're going to have a lot of people in your practices who may be struggling with a hypoadrenal state or with lower adrenaline function, maybe due to poor nutrient cofactors. They're not making enough norepinephrine or epinephrine. Sometimes we see this on the other side of using medications that are promoting these surges of these stress hormones on purpose. And we end up with receptor desensitization that leaves people feeling lacking. And this is where people can begin to self-medicate with adrenaline promoting activities. They overconsume coffee or sugar or chocolate. They may feel like they don't feel normal. Or they don't feel balanced without going on their daily 4 or 5 mile run. They may compensate by creating drama or too much to do. They may be overly pleasing. They may be people pleasers in their lives. But self-medicating with adrenaline is way more common than you might think. And this is where individuals can get into behaviors that stimulate higher levels of cortisol, stimulate more frequent surges of norepinephrine and epinephrine than their body can uniquely handle. Again, moving from what is hormetic for one person may be harmful for another person. And the natural pro-oxidant effects of stress hormones may actually end up being damaging in their bodies. So rather than stimulating optimal antioxidant response, it may be excessive. And so we always want to be asking, who is this person? The mountain behind my home is a great workout for me. It's health promoting, but it can be harmful or maybe even fatal for my mother who recently had a stroke and has cardiovascular disease. So we want to think about customizing the approach to the unique individual. And this starts to point to what types of recommendations we might make for a given individual, and brings me to a third myth that I want to talk about, which is the notion of antioxidant supplements. And they are certainly extremely popular, whether we're talking about things like curcumin or glutathione or N-acetyl cysteine, all sorts of different phytonutrients coming from plant foods, in particular, fruits and vegetables. But many practitioners believe that the biochemicals that are included in these foods or in these supplements are innate antioxidants themselves. And the reality is that most of these substances are pro-oxidant in nature. And the reason they work in stimulating an antioxidant response is they provide a small free radical burst that stimulates our endogenous antioxidant pathways to respond to. This speaks to our innate enzymatic and non-enzymatic defense systems against pro-oxidant damage. Things like glutathione and catalase and superoxide dismutase. And we need enough low dose oxidative triggers in order to stimulate those pathways. This is part of how hormesis works. But this is where the dosage plays a huge role on the effects of, for example, curcumin, a very popular antioxidant supplement. Well, curcumin is pro-oxidant in nature. And this is why you see in published research marked differences in outcomes if you're using relatively low dose, say 500 or 1,000 milligrams of curcumin a day, usually the 1,000 milligrams in divided doses. This can help to stimulate that endogenous antioxidant response. And this is seen clearly in research as being effective. But on the other hand, much, much higher doses of curcumin. So instead of 500 to 1,000 milligrams, once we start getting up into 4,000, 6,000, 8,000 milligrams of curcumin, we actually see that curcumin can exhibit a dramatic pro-oxidant effect. And this has been studied, for example, as complementary therapy with chemotherapy for killing cancer cells. And this is where, in a given individual, do we want to use the power of curcumin for stimulated antioxidant effects or for overt pro-oxidant effects? It depends on the person. It depends on the purpose. But there are a lot of practitioners who are thinking curcumin is an antioxidant. If 500 or 1,000 milligrams is good, then more is better. 1,000, 3,000, 5,000, starting to get up into higher and higher doses. And even if you don't fall prey to that myth that more is better, without overt education and empowerment from you, many of your patients are likely to assume that more is better. If I'm taking this and it's helping me, then when I'm having a rough day or a rough patch in my life, if I double or triple or quadruple the dose, surely that will work even more effectively. And of course, that is not true. So there is a delicate balance where, yes, we need oxidative stress. We need to stimulate these endogenous antioxidant pathways. But we need to understand the way we do that is by exposing ourselves to pro-oxidant effects or to free radicals. And so many of the supplements that we think of as being beneficial for this purpose are actually pro-oxidant in nature. And this includes many different supplements that are really quite popular that we think of as being phytonutrients in terms of giving us antioxidant benefits. And this is true not just of curcumin, but other things such as quercetin or resveratrol or sulforaphane. True antioxidants, things like vitamin E, are actually fairly rare in the diet, and they're actually extremely fragile in supplements. This is why, for example, overt antioxidants that we might supplement with need to be protected so that they don't get damaged in manufacturing or in encapsulation or storage before they are actually used. Glutathione, for example, is a very popular antioxidant supplement. But we know that if you are taking just plain glutathione in a capsule, first of all, it is very likely to be short acting and only locally acting in the gut. If you want that glutathione to have further reaching effects, then we need to think about either using the S-acetyl form of it, which is more readily absorbed in the gut, or the liposomal encapsulated form, which is better absorbed intact for greater systemic distribution and effect. But I want to move into the next myth that I want to bust, that it might be particularly surprising, which is when you are supplementing with overt antioxidants, you often are impairing the endogenous antioxidant synthesis. And this surprises a lot of practitioners, because we believe that maybe while we are stimulating these pathways with things like good, rich, colorful fruits and vegetables in our diet, and we're also doing just the right amount of exercise and just the right amount of stress for motivation and achievement, but not too much. We believe that we can pursue all of those things and also supplement with glutathione, or also supplement with, for example, N-acetylcysteine or NAC, which is also not only a raw ingredient needed to make glutathione, but NAC on its own is also an antioxidant. We believe that we can stimulate these pathways, but also overtly supplement with them simultaneously. And many practitioners are surprised to learn that supplementation with some of these substances actually impair downstream stimulation of our endogenous pathways. And one of the best examples that I can give you of that is broccoli sprouts. Many of you are well familiar with the power of cruciferous vegetables, right? We consume cruciferous vegetables because they contain, first of all, lots of healthy phytonutrients, but in particular, sulforaphane. And we know that broccoli is especially high in sulforaphane, and broccoli sprouts are the most sulforaphane dense vegetable that we can consume in our diet. But again, many folks are surprised to learn that broccoli sprouts work by causing a transient burst in reactive oxygen species. Sulforaphane, just like curcumin, just like resveratrol, is working because of a low-grade pro-oxidant stimulation. But research shows that if you present those phytonutrients, whether it's sulforaphane or even intake of broccoli sprouts, in an environment where the person is also, for example, supplementing with liposomal glutathione or supplementing with N-acetylcysteine, then the sulforaphane is not able to have that same burst of reactive oxygen species to stimulate our endogenous antioxidants. All right. So let me back up and clarify that one more time to make sure you get it. Absolutely, we may need during times of strong oxidative stress and challenge where we're worried about the body not having enough antioxidant capacity. For sure, for short periods of time, we may want to supplement with things like liposomal glutathione or N-acetylcysteine for a particular purpose during a particular phase of our interventional plan. This is where order of operations and interventional planning is essential. but we don't want to keep supplementing with them forever. They may be needed as the body is really struggling with high demand for antioxidants, but we want to leave those aside to begin to instead use this hormesis effects to stimulate our endogenous pathways. If we do both simultaneously, we don't get the sum of their parts. We're either overtly supplementing with these antioxidants, or we are letting phytonutrients in our food or low dose phytonutrients in our supplements, for example, stimulate our own pathways. And so we can end up with an actual inability, for example, to optimally use N-acetylcysteine to help boost glutathione synthesis if we are taking too high of doses or we're taking it for too long. This is where ultimately food, a good, colorful, diverse diet of whole foods is the best antioxidant solution. And it's the best way to avoid the antioxidant trap. And this gets into the fourth myth that I want to talk about, that supplements, you're not going to out supplement a low quality, poor quality diet long term. Again, maybe very valuable in the short term for helping to fill gaps. Or especially to help someone who is really wrestling with a very high oxidative stress and damage load. But your typical supplement, antioxidant supplement, has 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 or 6 at most phytonutrients. But your typical individual vegetable or fruit has hundreds of phytonutrients. Many people are surprised to learn that a stalk of broccoli contains over 700 distinct phytonutrients. And each of those is providing subtle signaling that is synergistic in stimulating optimal response in the body. And this is where isolated compounds are trying to replicate a complex synergy in whole foods that is simply not possible. Now, while we're helping someone to find a healthy diet that they can prepare and afford and enjoy and palate on a regular basis, of course, supplements can be very valuable. But over time, teaching people to find a way to eat from the rainbow so they get a rich diversity of phytonutrients in their diet, because different phytonutrient families are represented by different colors in our foods. So you're getting different clusters of nutrients in a yellow fruit rather than a red fruit, or in a green vegetable as opposed to an orange vegetable. We want to eat from the rainbow, but we want to think about using supplements sparingly and in a targeted fashion to address gaps in our diet, not to give us a free pass to eat a lot of strong pro-oxidant foods like French fries and char-broiled burgers with lots of burn marks on them, thinking that we're going to out supplement the pro-oxidant damage from that diet. And ultimately looking for food to be our primary solution for addressing the need for antioxidant hormesis in the body. I also want to talk about use of medications that can interfere with the need for this low-grade oxidative stimulation. So just like exercise, just like these phytonutrients in our diet, we need these low-grade bursts. We need a little bit of stress. We need a little bit of challenge from a temperature perspective, from a toxic perspective. But we want them to be small and something that our physiology is capable of responding to. If you're an extremely healthy person, then you can handle short-term, more aggressive surges of pro-oxidant challenge. If it's a person who is struggling, who maybe has type 2 diabetes or entrenched hypothyroidism or chronic fatigue syndrome, even as an extreme example. These are people who do not adapt well to strong pro-oxidant challenge. Aggressive exercise is not appropriate for them, for example. Extensive fasting or sauna is not appropriate for them because they're not in a place to be able to handle more aggressive hormetic challenges. And so we want to fit the solution for individual needs. Now, a quick word about minerals, because antioxidant pathways require cofactor nutrients. And these cofactors often involve, in particular, B vitamins and minerals. And in the world of functional medicine, B vitamins are a super hot topic, and a B complex is an extremely common supplement. And indeed, supplementing with core nutrients where they might be lacking. In this way, we're supplementing with cofactors that are actually needed to support endogenous pathways. And we can do targeted testing in order to understand where lifestyle or genetics or dietary preferences might be promoting a gap in the diet. But a B complex, while definitely can be really helpful, especially for the glutathione pathway that is so dependent on B2 and B6 and B9 and B12, and also our mitochondria, which needs B1 and B2 and B3 and B5 and B6. B vitamins alone are not enough. And we often make the assumption that minerals, trace minerals, are sufficient in our diet. And so we're trying to eat a healthy whole foods diet, and then we're taking a B complex. This is a common interventional approach for practitioners looking through the functional medicine lens. But behind the scenes, lots of individuals are struggling with mineral insufficiency. And again, this can come from preferred dietary choices. Genetics can be involved in terms of impaired absorption or utilization of certain nutrients. But minerals in particular compete with one another. They compete for absorption at the level of the gut and being brought into systemic circulation. And they often are competing for cellular uptake as well. And this is where individuals can struggle to get optimal levels of all critical essential trace minerals in their diet. And if you end up lacking in zinc or copper or manganese or magnesium or selenium or molybdenum, then we can be impairing our endogenous pathways simply because of inadequate nutrition. Maybe our lifestyles, our intake of good, colorful plant foods is stimulating those pathways appropriately, but we need building materials if we want to build an antioxidant. At SAFM, we like to say, no lettuce, no salad, right? You have to have building blocks in order to create these critical biochemicals. So much of popular dietary debate focuses on macronutrients. What's the perfect percentage of fat or amount of carbs? But all of human biochemistry is fueled by and requires micronutrition. And so we want to make sure that we are teaching our patients and clients that modern agricultural practices are leaving a suboptimal mineral density in an awful lot of our plant foods via topsoil depletion, monoculture, farming, poor crop rotation. This can actually be at play even or in organically produced crops. And it points to the criticality of eating a diverse diet so that we include a rich diversity of foods that tend to include higher percentages of various minerals. But don't want to lose sight of the critical role of minerals with regard to supporting these endogenous pathways. And then the fifth myth that I want to talk about is the notion of Boosting antioxidant pathways is enough to create optimal redox balance in the body. And in the same way that we're not going to out supplement a poor quality diet, we have to help individuals to identify where their lifestyle is creating an excessive amount of pro-oxidant demand that is simply overloading our capacity. All of the functional imbalances in the body can result when there's either too much demand or not enough supply. So yes, it's critical to make sure that we're supporting our antioxidant pathways. Again, catalase, glutathione, superoxide dismutase. There are several of them. But at the same time, we want to be taking a keen look at our lifestyle and where are our choices exposing us to excessive pro-oxidant demand that is overloading even a good, plentiful antioxidant capacity. And we teach so much about lifestyle through the functional medicine lens, and we help people to understand that we want to not eat French fries. We want to not eat char-broiled foods on a regular basis. Small amounts of these episodically is not a problem if we're healthy and we have good endogenous pathways. But if it becomes our normal, if it becomes a mainstay, and we're also not getting enough sleep, and we're also experiencing too much stress, and we're also bringing too much toxicity into the body, for example, from personal hygiene and beauty products like hair color and nail polish and sunscreen and makeup, and all of these toxic chemicals that we readily absorb through our skin that can wreak oxidative havoc. We can overload our bodies. But I want to talk for a moment about reflecting on excessive sources of endogenous pro-oxidant demand. Yes, you need to be teaching people about avoiding the excessive external demand. But internally, we also have known common mechanisms for generating excessive oxidative stress and damage. And certainly one of those for sure is stress and elevated levels of stress hormones, especially slowly, progressively creeping up levels of cortisol. And many people in your practices have suboptimally high levels of cortisol. Heck, here in the United States, it's kind of the American way to just be a little too driven, a little too focused on more, better, faster, sooner, now. And this can set us up for a lot of stress. Mental, emotional stress, social stress, family stress for sure, but also internal physiological stress. Cortisol, norepinephrine, epinephrine, these are critical biochemicals we need to survive, but they are promoting oxidative stress in the body. And hidden physiological imbalances can be a major driver for higher levels of stress hormones. And in particular, I want to talk about 3 often overlooked sources of physiological stress. The first one is sleep apnea. We have continuous complex case practice at SAFM. We believe strongly that the best way you go from knowledge to true capability as a practitioner is to constantly be testing and using and expanding your knowledge to reflect on, assess, and respond to real-life complex cases. And it's amazing to me, even after 15 years of teaching functional medicine, that sleep apnea is so often hidden and wreaking havoc on people's bodies without their knowledge. An awful lot of people with sleep apnea have no idea that their sleep is so disrupted. And without an impetus, if they have a very tolerant spouse or maybe a spouse who also snores and is adapted to being able to sleep despite disruptive noise and movement, they also may not know. But when individuals are awakening in the morning without feeling rested, and in particular, if they have dry throats, or they have trouble swallowing in the morning, or they have dry or chapped lips. You can learn to really look for some of the cues and clues for hidden sleep apnea to make sure that it's not a hidden major daily or nightly stressor behind the scenes that are driving higher levels of cortisol that are promoting excessive oxidative demand in their bodies. As we age, our endogenous antioxidant pathways naturally become less effective. We produce fewer of the enzymes that are needed to catalyze the synthesis of these antioxidants. And so, unfortunately, as we age, our pro-oxidant demand also gets higher. And this is a major source of what we call the symptoms of aging. And so we want to be on top of assessing these dynamics. And sleep apnea certainly becomes much more common as we age. The second often hidden driver of physiological stress are food sensitivities. This is often IgG antibody mediated hypersensitivity in the body. Sometimes it's also IgA mediated in our mucosa, especially in mucosa of the gut. But these are not overt food allergies. They're not going to be tested for in any normal way, any typical conventional way if an individual goes to see an allergist. But loss of barrier function in the gut is becoming more and more common in our practices for a variety of reasons we can talk about in a different episode. But when we lose barrier function in the gut and we lose our tight junction protection in the mucosa of our gut, then we create excessive intestinal permeability that allows food that's still in the process of being digested, or maybe if someone has maldigestion, it's just poorly digested overall. But it allows there to be overexposure to those partially digested foods in the basement membrane of the intestines, where our gut associated lymphatic tissue resides. This is where the lion's share of the body's immune cells are residing. And we can end up having excessive immune system exposure to partially digested everyday foods that a person is eating. And these may be very healthy foods, right? Phytonutrient rich fruits and vegetables. But the immune system being overexposed to a partially digested food that is not yet degraded into individual nutrients, but is still recognizable as a foreign substance, can stimulate the immune system to have an antibody response over time to these foods. And this can also trigger the complement cascade that would promote an inflammatory response to those foods. Well, because an individual has developed this hypersensitivity via frequent exposure to foods they eat all the time, this means that inflammation from their everyday diet is going to be a common driver for a surge of pro-oxidant demand. It's also a common reason for behind the scenes progressive increases in cortisol levels. You especially see it where people will honestly self-identify as not being very stressed mentally or emotionally. We don't have to have mental or emotional stress to drive cortisol levels up dramatically. It can be endogenous physiological stress. And it's often multifactorial in people as they age. And so we want to think about things like hidden food sensitivities or hidden sleep apnea as being a potential major driver for excessive oxidative stress in the body that will outstrip our antioxidant capacity. And so another major driver for this specifically has to do with blood sugar. And this is incredibly commonplace dynamic, but it's an especially common mechanism for redox imbalance in individuals who have insulin resistance that has not yet progressed to the point where it's diagnosable as type 2 diabetes. You've heard me talk in so many different clinical tips and prior podcast episodes about the early stages of insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction, and how typically, conventionally, we don't diagnose it and do anything about it until it's at stage 3 out of 4. And often individuals have been struggling with progressive increase in blood sugar for many years before it trips the pre-diabetes threshold, as though somehow increasing blood sugar is fine or ignorable before that threshold, but after that threshold, we should do something about it, which is of course not true and is illogical. We need to worry about all of the progressive stages of subclinical increase in blood sugar that is chronic. Short-term increases in blood sugar are normal. They are natural. We all have ups and downs in life. But when we start to see hemoglobin A1C creep up, especially above about 5.2, 5.3%, we need to be concerned about how this elevated blood sugar on a subclinical level is still wreaking oxidative havoc to tissue, and especially tissue that frequently turns over, that the kidneys, the lining of our arteries, our eyes, our retinas, and also our nerves. Individuals can struggle with low-grade neuropathic effects well in advance even of a pre-diabetes diagnosis, depending on what other factors might be at play for preventing optimal function of their nervous tissue. And so we want to be always assessing hemoglobin A1C and fasting glucose in every single one of our patients and clients, and responding when there's even a subclinical elevation. But a radical thought might be that we also need to respond in stage 2 of metabolic dysfunction when blood sugar is not only not highly elevated, it's actually suppressed. And this is the hyperinsulinemic phase of metabolic dysfunction, where people are much more vulnerable to episodes of hypoglycemia, not hyperglycemia. But it's important to remember that when we have a hypoglycemic episode, part of how the body responds is to increase stress hormones to purposefully trigger gluconeogenesis to artificially increase blood sugar biochemically so that we can thrive. And so when we're having chronic, especially extended or frequent periods of hypoglycemia, this is not only causing surges of increased blood sugar, courtesy of the liver, but it's also creating those surges of stress hormones that are wreaking pro-oxidant havoc on our tissues. So we want to be looking for all of these early stages of metabolic dysfunction and responding, because behind the scenes of stage 0, stage 1, stage 2, or early stage 3 of metabolic dysfunction may be a major hidden source of excessive pro-oxidant demand. So that's 5 myths that I really want you to keep in mind in terms of optimally responding to your patients and clients and helping them to have good reduction oxidation balance so that they have plentiful antioxidant capacity to more than match their pro-oxidant demand or load coming from their typical lifestyle. There's a lot of different markers that you can look at in order to assess that. We teach quite a bit about that at SAFM. And in particular, thinking about everyday markers that are readily accessible in either annual physical lab panels or from major national labs. things like markedly elevated HDL. We often think about high density lipoprotein is the good cholesterol, right? And the more, the better. Well, research shows that's not true. Actually, excessively elevated HDL for women, this would be 100 or higher. For men, this might be in the 90s, for example, can actually be a strong indication of redox imbalance or excessive oxidative stress and damage. And this is where HDL starts to lose its reverse cholesterol transport capability so that it no longer can be accurately labeled the good cholesterol. So HDL, more and more and more, is not necessarily better. We also can look at more richly at our low density lipoprotein levels and assess a marker called oxidized LDL. Because after all, LDL is frequently not the bad cholesterol either. We need LDL. It is the primary lipoprotein carrier of all cholesterol out from the liver to provide systemic repair for cellular repair, shoring up cell membranes for new cellular synthesis, which requires cholesterol for synthesis of the vast majority of our steroid hormones. We need cholesterol. It's a critical essential nutrient. We just don't want to have excessive levels of cholesterol in a heavy pro-oxidant environment. But you can actually look at oxidized levels of LDL and understand more specifically in the cardiovascular system what the vulnerability might be to redox imbalance. And there are other markers that can be really quite valuable, things like elevated uric acid or overly suppressed uric acid or things like suppressed bilirubin, right? We think about bilirubin as being a waste product, but it actually in our body, it serves as a powerful antioxidant. You can really learn some interesting markers that you can use. We're seeing the rise of other markers of lipid peroxidation as well, things like F2 isoprostane as being a wonderful reflection of free radical damage to cell membranes. This is a type of pro-oxidant damage that people are especially vulnerable to if they have suboptimal levels of CoQ10 in their body. And this is common in individuals who are consuming medications that can deplete CoQ10, like a statin drug or a beta blocker that might be used for hypertension. So these are dynamics that we want to consider in terms of assessing what might actually be at play. So another good one is GGT, right? As a marker of the liver catalyzing a need for more glutathione. GGT, at least in the US, often not included in a typical CMP, but can usually readily and inexpensively be ordered in order to understand whether the liver has sufficiency of glutathione or not. So again, keep in mind that there's some more esoteric markers you can learn to use, but simple everyday things like making sure HDL isn't too elevated, making sure that bilirubin isn't too low and a reflection of excessive utilization for quenching free radicals. Not looking for uric acid to be optimal, right? Not too high, not too low. Lots of other things you can learn to assess in this space. But I want to summarize for today, thinking about not getting caught in the antioxidant trap, right? Myth number one, oxidative stress is always bad. Not true at all. We need it to create hormesis because endogenous antioxidant pathways have to be stimulated. We just want to have bioindividually the right amount. Myth number two, more antioxidants are always better, right? The more antioxidant, the more protection. Not true at all. There's a typical U-shaped curve for most nutrients that we think of as being antioxidant in nature because they're actually pro-oxidant in nature. This is why you expect very different effects from low doses of a phytonutrient versus very high doses of them. And you want to know the difference. Myth number 3, you can out supplement a really poor quality diet. Food, a basket of supplements is not the same as food because the density of nutrients and the sheer diversity of phytonutrients included even in a single type of vegetable, like an apple or a stalk of broccoli, we're talking hundreds of nutrients as opposed to the 1 or 2 or 5 or even 15 or 20 we might overtly supplement with. Myth number 4, that we can supplement with these pro-oxidant stimulators and actual antioxidants at the same time and get a cumulative effect, right? I want to be able to consume lots of broccoli sprouts to stimulate NRF2 and get more glutathione production in my body. But I also want to take lots of liposomal glutathione at the same time because I believe the two of them will be additive and I'll get much more antioxidant impact. Not true. Not true for glutathione, not true for N-acetylcysteine. We want to decide whether we want to overtly support those antioxidants until we build enough strength and then we step away from them. Maybe we have occasional pulsed usage for short-term needs, but then we step away from these and think instead about stimulating these pathways via diet, or where appropriate, further stimulating them with targeted low dose supplementation from a phytonutrient viewpoint. And then myth number 5, it's all about maximizing antioxidant capacity. Not true. We need to assess the pro-oxidant load for individuals. What is their overall free radical load look like, or free radical generating lifestyle look like? Lifestyle on the outside in terms of toxicity and stressors and choice exercise, for example, but also things that are affected endogenously based on some of the other nuanced responses to our choices, whether it's chronic snoring and sleep apnea or hidden food sensitivities or subclinical metabolic dysfunction that's been largely overlooked through the conventional medicine lens. So I want to thank you so much for joining me today to help you to avoid the antioxidant trap. Again, the more we learn about inflammation, we know that the mechanism via which inflammation wreaks so much havoc in promoting chronic disease that's rampant in our practices is via free radical damage. And so redox balance is an essential functional dynamic to consider and assess in your practices so you can do your very best clinical work. Please, if you've enjoyed today's session, please subscribe and share this educational opportunity with your colleagues. Have a great day.